The office tower at 44 Meridian Avenue was the kind of building that made people feel small on purpose. Its glass walls stretched 40 stories into the Cincinnati sky, and the lobby alone was larger than most people's homes. Gold lettering above the reception desk read Hartwell Industries, and beneath it, in smaller but no less proud font, founded in 1974, built to last, Olivia Carter arrived every morning at 6:15. Before the executives came in with their cold brew coffees and tailored suits, she wore a pale gray uniform with her name stitched above the left breast pocket, and she pushed a cleaning cart that squeaked slightly on the left wheel, a squeak she had never bothered to report because she had grown fond of it. It announced her wherever she went, and in a building where people routinely looked through her as though she were made of glass. She appreciated anything that confirmed she existed. She was 7 months pregnant, and the weight of it had settled into her lower back like a stone. But she moved with a patience that suggested she had decided long ago not to complain about things she had chosen. Every morning, she cleaned the executive floor first, working from the conference rooms outward to the individual offices, wiping surfaces, emptying bins, and occasionally pausing to read the framed mission statements on the walls. She had memorized most of them by now. She found them interesting not because they were inspiring, but because they said almost nothing about the actual people who worked there. Thomas Greer was usually the only other person on the floor at that hour. He was 61 years old, worked the early security shift, and had been with Hartwell Industries for 22 years. He brought 2 cups of coffee from the break room every morning, one for himself and one for Olivia, and they would stand near the window that faced east and watch the city wake up below them. "You're carrying low," Thomas said one Tuesday morning, handing her the cup. "My wife carried low with both boys." She said it felt like they were already trying to walk out. Olivia laughed and pressed a hand to her stomach. "She's not walking anywhere yet. She's very comfortable." "Sure you should still be doing this kind of work?" he asked, not unkindly. "I'm sure," Olivia said simply. And Thomas, who had learned over 4 months that Olivia Carter answered questions exactly as much as she wanted to, and no more, let it go. What Thomas did not know, what no one in the building knew, was that Olivia had a law degree from Georgetown, a business degree from Wharton, and a personal net worth that would have made most of the executives on this floor feel moderately poor. She was not here because she needed the work. She was here because her grandfather had built this company with his hands and his nerve. And when he died 14 months ago, he had left it to her with a single condition written into his estate plan, that she spend at least 6 months inside the company in a non-executive capacity before she formally assumed ownership. Gerald Hartwell had believed, above everything, that leaders who did not understand the daily reality of the people who worked for them were not leaders at all. They were passengers. So Olivia had come. She had taken the janitorial position under her real name, banking on the fact that no one in the executive ranks had ever bothered to look up who Gerald Hartwell's grandchildren were. She had been right. Not a single person had connected the pregnant woman pushing a cart to the Hartwell family name. She had learned a great deal in 4 months. She had learned which managers treated the cleaning staff like furniture and which ones said good morning. She had learned that the company cafeteria charged staff 3 times what the executives paid for the same meal, a policy buried so deep in the internal handbook that most people did not know it existed. She had learned that Raymond Holloway, the senior vice president of operations, had a habit of walking through the floor at noon and pointing out things he found unsatisfactory: a smudged window, a bin that had been emptied but not relined, a cart left in a hallway for 8 minutes while its operator used the bathroom. He kept a small notebook, and he wrote things in it. And people who appeared in his notebook tended to have difficult months afterward. Olivia had appeared in his notebook twice. She knew, because Clara Reeves, Raymond's assistant, had mentioned it in passing with an expression that suggested she was warning her. On a Wednesday in the 3rd week of October, Raymond Holloway walked onto the executive floor at 11 in the morning, which was unusual. He was with 2 men from HR, which was more unusual still. He moved with the deliberate energy of someone who had already made a decision and was now simply performing its conclusion. He stopped in front of Olivia. "Who was wiping down the glass partition outside conference room? Be your Carter?" He said yes, Olivia said, turning to face him. He looked at her stomach with an expression that he probably believed was professional neutrality, but was something considerably less flattering. "We're letting you go," he said. "Effective immediately. We've determined that your position represents an unnecessary operational cost, and given your current physical condition, we have concerns about liability." "You're firing me because I'm pregnant, or restructuring the cleaning division," he said. "Your position is being eliminated." "Mine specifically," she said. "Yes." Around them, the floor had gone very quiet. 3 associates who had been walking toward the elevator had slowed without quite stopping. A woman at a nearby desk had turned her chair slightly. Clara Reeves, standing 15 feet away outside Raymond's office, with a folder pressed to her chest, was looking at the floor. "All right," Olivia said quietly. She took off her name badge. She set it on the cart. She looked at Raymond Holloway for a moment, long enough that he shifted his weight. And then she walked toward the elevator without another word. Thomas Greer was waiting near the lobby security desk. When she stepped out of the elevator, he had heard. In a building like this, things traveled fast among the people the executives forgot to watch. His expression carried an apology that was not his to give, and Olivia shook her head gently to tell him it was all right. He reached under his desk and pulled out a small envelope. Cream-colored and sealed with wax, the letter H pressed into it. His hand was steady, but his voice was not. "He gave this to me 8 years ago," Thomas said quietly. "Gerald himself. He said I'd know when it was time." Olivia took the envelope. She looked at it for a long moment, feeling the familiar weight of her grandfather's handwriting through the paper. The careful pressure of a man who had never done anything carelessly. "Thank you, Thomas," she said. She walked out through the glass doors of 44 Meridian Avenue into the pale October morning, and the city moved around her as though nothing had happened, because to the city nothing had. But in the quiet of her own knowing, something had shifted. The patient she had been carrying for 4 months had just become something else entirely. It had become readiness. She found a bench 2 blocks away and sat down carefully, one hand resting on her stomach, and she opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages long, written in her grandfather's careful, slanted handwriting on paper that had yellowed slightly at the edges from 8 years of waiting inside that envelope. Olivia read it slowly, the way she had always read things that mattered, giving each sentence the room it needed before moving to the next one. "My dear Olivia," it began. "If you are reading this, then Thomas kept his word, which means the situation inside the building has become exactly what I feared it might become in my absence. I want you to know that I am not surprised. I am only sorry that you had to feel it firsthand before you could fix it." She pressed her lips together and kept reading. Her grandfather had written the letter in the winter of his last healthy year, when he had already begun to understand that the illness was going to win eventually and that he needed to prepare, not just a legal document, but a human one. He had known that leaving the company directly to Olivia through a formal announcement would invite the board to find ways around it. Powerful men had a particular talent for finding ways around things they did not want. So he had constructed something more careful. He had built the transfer of ownership through a series of holding structures that only fully resolved when Olivia formally presented herself to the company's founding trustee, which was Senator Harold Vance, her godfather, who had been sitting on that document for over a year and quietly going out of his mind with the effort of not calling her. The letter also told her something else. Raymond Holloway had not stumbled into his position through talent. Gerald Hartwell had noted in his precise and unsentimental way that Raymond had been placed inside Hartwell Industries by a group of outside investors who had been attempting for 6 years to acquire the company through quiet internal pressure. They had positioned people, shifted budgets, and created conditions that made the company look less profitable than it was, all in preparation for a moment when the board might vote to sell. Gerald had discovered this 18 months before he died and had begun building a counter-strategy. He had not finished it. He was leaving the rest to Olivia. She folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope with the same care it had been given to her. Then she sat for a moment with her hand on her stomach and the pale October light falling across the bench and thought about her grandfather the way she always did when she needed steadiness. His particular laugh, the way he could make a room feel warmer just by walking into it. The fact that he had taught her to play chess when she was 6 and had never once let her win until she actually deserved to. She took out her phone and called. Diane Foss. Diane picked up on the first ring, which meant she had been expecting the call. "Tell me," she said. "He fired me this morning," Olivia said. Raymond Holloway. In front of the floor, there was a brief silence, and then Diane said something under her breath that was not entirely appropriate for a senior attorney at a firm of her standing. Then she said, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Olivia said. "I read the letter." "Good," Diane said, and her voice shifted into the register Olivia recognized as her working mode, sharp and forward-moving. "Then you know what comes next? I've had everything prepared for 3 weeks. I was starting to think you were going to stay in that building until the baby actually arrived." "I wanted to be thorough," Olivia said. "Shh. You wanted to be certain," Diane said. Which was more accurate, and they both knew it. "Come to my office. I'll have everything laid out by the time you get here." Diane Foss operated out of a building on Elm Street that was deliberately unpretentious. Because Diane had once told Olivia that the law firms with the most marble in their lobbies were usually the ones with the least substance in their briefs. Her office was on the 4th floor and looked out over a courtyard where a single oak tree was currently doing its best with what remained of its autumn leaves. When Olivia arrived, Diane was already at her long work table with documents, arranged in the precise and color-coded system that Olivia had been watching her use for 15 years. They had been friends since Olivia was 19, and Diane was 28, and they had ended up on the same delayed flight from Philadelphia, and had spent 4 hours talking about contract, law, and whether a person could be both deeply principled and genuinely effective in a world that often rewarded neither. They had decided, yes, with effort. They had been proving it to each other since. Diane poured 2 glasses of water, set one in front of Olivia, and sat down across from her. "All right," she said. "The Hartwell Family Trust resolves to you in full upon your presentation to Senator Vance, which we can do tomorrow morning. Once that's done, the ownership transfer is immediate and irrevocable. The board will be notified simultaneously. The annual shareholder meeting is in 4 days, which means the timing is almost insultingly perfect." "Almost," Olivia said. "The more pressing issue is Raymond Holloway," Diane continued. "Your grandfather's letter is useful, but we need something current and documentable. Do you have anything from inside the building?" Olivia's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen. The message was from a number she did not recognize. But the name in the message made her breath pause for just a moment. "This is Clara Reeves. I'm Raymond's assistant. I know who you are. I've known for 2 months. I didn't say anything because I was watching the same way you were. I have files. I think you should see them. Please call me." Olivia turned the phone so Diane could read it. Diane read it twice. Then she leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling briefly in the way she did when something had surprised her, which was not often. "Well," she said. "I know," Olivia said. She called Clara back immediately. Clara answered with the careful quiet of someone who was still at their desk and needed to sound like they were doing something ordinary. Her voice was low and steady and gave Olivia the immediate impression of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was now ready to set it down. Clara had been Ramon Holloway's assistant for 3 years. In that time, she had watched him manipulate quarterly reports, redirect departmental budgets to accounts she had traced back to the outside investment group, and systematically remove employees who asked too many questions or performed too well in areas he wanted to appear weak. She had kept copies of everything, not because she had known Olivia was coming, but because she had a functioning conscience and a very organized mind and had understood instinctively that documentation was the difference between a story no one believed and a case no one could dismiss. She had recognized Olivia in the 2nd week. Not from any family photograph, but from a single framed picture in Gerald Hartwell's office, which had never been cleared out after his death because no one had been quite sure whose job it was to do that. In the picture, Gerald was standing with a young woman at what appeared to be a graduation. And the young woman had the same posture and the same particular quality of stillness that Clara had noticed in the janitor on the executive floor who paid attention to everything and said very little. She had decided to wait and watch. She had waited for months. She had watched Raymond fire a pregnant woman for the crime of existing in his building, and she had decided she was done waiting. "I can bring the files to wherever you need," Clara said. "I have everything on an encrypted drive. It covers 14 months of financial activity." "Tomorrow morning," Olivia said, 9 o'clock. "I'll send you the address." After she hung up, Olivia sat quietly for a moment and thought about the strange way that preparation and patience, when held long enough, eventually stopped feeling like waiting and started feeling like inevitability. She had come into Hartwell Industries knowing only that she needed to understand it. She was leaving with something more valuable than understanding. She was leaving with evidence, allies, and a plan that her grandfather had started and that she was now going to finish. She noticed a daughter who was currently making her feelings about the day's events known through a series of enthusiastic movements that suggested the child had inherited at least some portion of the family temperament. "For more days," Olivia said quietly to her daughter and to herself. "Then we go back in." Diane refilled her water glass without being asked, the way she always did when she could tell Olivia was thinking, and they spent the next 2 hours going through every document on the table with the focused and unhurried attention of two women who knew exactly what they were building and were not going to build it. Carelessly, outside the window, the oak tree released a handful of leaves into the courtyard below, and the afternoon light moved across the floor of the office in the slow and indifferent way that time moves when something important is approaching. Not rushing, not pausing, simply continuing forward the way it always does. Regardless of whether the people inside the story are ready, Olivia Carter was ready. The morning of the annual Hartwell Industries shareholder meeting arrived with the kind of stillness that October saved for its most important days. The sky over Cincinnati was a deep and cloudless blue, the sort of blue that made buildings look sharper and shadows look cleaner, and the air carried just enough cold in it to make a person feel awake in their bones. Olivia Carter stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning and looked at herself for a long time. She had chosen her outfit the night before with the care of someone who understood that appearance, while never the whole story, was always the first page of it. A deep navy dress that acknowledged her pregnancy without apologizing for it. A single strand of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother, and a pair of low-heeled shoes in dark cognac leather that she had owned for 6 years and trusted completely. She wore her dark hair down, which she rarely did, because her grandfather had always said she looked most like herself when she wore it that way. And today of all days, she wanted to look entirely like herself. She ate breakfast slowly. She called Diane at 7:15 and they confirmed the sequence of the morning one final time. She texted Thomas Greer, who had taken a personal day, and told him to wear something nice. He responded with a single message that said simply, "I already am." She smiled at that and finished her coffee, and then she picked up her bag, which contained a copy of every document Clara had delivered 2 days ago, the original letter from her grandfather, and the formal trust resolution paperwork that Senator Harold Vance had signed at 9 in the morning 2 days prior. In his office, with an expression of profound relief that had made Olivia laugh for the first time in weeks, the senator had embraced her carefully, mindful of her stomach, and said, "Your grandfather would be extremely pleased and completely unsurprised." She had held on to that. The car arrived at 8:30. Diane was already inside, dressed in charcoal gray with the focused expression she wore when she was operating at her highest level. Clara Reeves was seated beside her, quieter than usual, her hands folded in her lap and her encrypted drive in the bag at her feet. They had spent the previous 2 days working with a forensic accounting firm that Diane trusted with her life, and the picture those accountants had assembled from Clara's files was thorough, documented, and devastating. Raymond Holloway had been redirecting departmental budget allocations for 19 months. funneling money through a subsidiary structure to a private investment group called Meridian Capital Partners, the same group that had been attempting to destabilize Hartwell Industries from the inside for the purpose of forcing a distressed sale. The total amount redirected was slightly over $4 million. There were emails, transfer records, and in one instance, a handwritten note that Clara had photographed before it was thrown away, in which Raymond had confirmed a timeline with someone at Meridian Capital using language that left very little room for innocent interpretation. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the 40th floor conference room, the largest room in the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city on 3 sides. It was the room where Gerald Hartwell had held his most important meetings, and Olivia had cleaned it 4 times during her months in the building, including once while Raymond Holloway sat at the head of the table running a dry rehearsal of a presentation and spoke to her exactly once to tell her that her cart was blocking the door. She remembered that moment. Now, without bitterness and without satisfaction, which surprised her slightly. She had expected to feel one or the other by this point. Instead, what she felt was something quieter and more settled, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with Raymond Holloway at all, and everything to do with the company her grandfather had built and the people who worked inside it and what she intended to do for both. The car pulled up to 44 Meridian Avenue at 9:40. The doorman, a young man named Peter who had always nodded at Olivia during her morning arrivals, opened the car door and then stopped when he saw her. Not in recognition of who she was, but in the particular way people sometimes stop when something in a situation is shifted. They can feel it before they can name it. Thomas Greer was waiting in the lobby. He had worn his best suit, dark blue with a white shirt, and he was standing with the straight-backed posture of someone who had decided this was an occasion. When Olivia walked through the glass doors, he looked at her for a moment, and then he smiled the way people smile when something they believed in for a very long time turns out to be true. "Good morning, Ms. Hartwell," he said, using her grandfather's name, and his voice was steady. "Good morning, Thomas," she said. "You look wonderful." "So do you," he said simply. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was quiet. Diane reviewed her notes. Clara looked straight ahead. Olivia watched the numbers climb and thought about her grandfather's hands, which had been the hands of someone who had worked physically for many years before he built anything. Large and careful and always slightly warm. She thought about what he had said to her when she was 12 years old and had been passed over for something at school that she had deserved, and had come home furious and wounded. He had made her tea and sat across from her at the kitchen table and said, in his unhurried way, that the world was full of people who would underestimate her, and that she had 2 choices about what to do with that. She could spend her energy being angry at each one of them individually, which would exhaust her. Or she could spend that same energy becoming so thoroughly and undeniably herself that the underestimating eventually became their problem, and not hers. She had chosen the second option. She had been choosing it ever since. The doors opened onto the 40th floor. The conference room was already full. 22 board members and senior shareholders sat around the long table, along with various department heads and legal representatives. A podium had been set up at the head of the table where Gerald Hartwell had always stood, and the chair beside it. The one that had always been called the founding chair was empty. It had been empty since Gerald died, and no one had sat in it because no one had quite had the nerve to claim it without the succession. Being formally resolved, Raymond Holloway was seated 3 chairs. From the head of the table on the right side, he was in a charcoal suit, and he wore the expression of a man who had arrived early and arranged things to his satisfaction. The expression of someone who believed he was about to have a good morning. He was looking at his phone when the door opened. Senator Harold Vance was already at the podium. He was 70 years old with white hair and the bearing of someone who had spent 50 years being taken seriously and had decided to keep going. He had arrived before anyone else, at Olivia's request. And he had spent the time before the room filled speaking quietly to 2 of the senior board members, who had been with the company since Gerald's time, and who had, when shown the trust documentation the previous afternoon, sat very still for a long moment, and then said they were glad someone had finally come. When Olivia walked through the conference room door, Senator Vance looked up and something in his expression shifted into a particular warmth that several people in the room noticed and could not immediately account for. Raymond Holloway looked up from his phone. He looked at Olivia, then at Diane, then back at Olivia. His expression moved through several stages in a short period of time, beginning with confusion and passing through something that might have been recognition before arriving at a place that was not quite understanding, but was adjacent to a dawning and unwelcome suspicion. Olivia walked to the head of the table. She set her bag down beside the founding chair. She placed her hand on the back of it for a moment, and then she sat down in it with the ease of someone returning to a place they had always been meant to be. The room was very quiet. Senator Vance cleared his throat and spoke in his measured way. Before we begin the formal agenda, I need to address the matter of the Hartwell Family Trust, which has been pending resolution since the passing of Gerald Hartwell 14 months ago. I am pleased to inform this board that the trust has now been formally and irrevocably resolved. Effective as of 9/14 on the morning of 2 days ago, the controlling majority of Hartwell Industries, representing 61% of all shares, is held by Gerald Hartwell's granddaughter and designated successor, Olivia Carter Hartwell, who is present in this room and who assumes the position of chairwoman of the board with immediate effect. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture too. Raymond Holloway had gone very still. One of the older board members, a woman named Patricia Sung, who had known Gerald for 30 years, began to applaud. It was quiet at first, and then it was not, as others joined, and the sound filled the glass-walled room and went out over the city below. Raymond Holloway did not applaud. He was looking at Olivia with an expression that had finally arrived at understanding. Understanding had not been kind to him. Olivia waited for the room to settle. Then she stood, because she wanted to be standing for this. And she spoke without notes. My grandfather built this company on a principle that he stated plainly and practiced daily, which was that the dignity of every person inside this building was non-negotiable. Regardless of their title or their salary or what they carried in their hands when they came to work in the morning, I spent 4 months in this building as a member of the cleaning staff. And I want this board to know that the people who clean these floors and empty these bins and arrive before the rest of you every morning are among the finest employees this company has. They deserve better wages, better benefits, and the simple, basic respect of being seen. She paused. I also want this board to know that during those 4 months, I observed significant financial irregularities that have since been fully documented by a forensic accounting team. Those documents are being delivered to the board's legal counsel and to the relevant regulatory authorities as I speak. The irregularities center on the deliberate misappropriation of company funds by a senior member of this leadership team. In coordination with an outside investment group called Meridian Capital Partners, every head in the room turned toward Raymond Holloway. Raymond Holloway stood up. His chair pushed back with a sound that was too loud in the quiet room. "This is not legitimate," he said, and his voice was attempting authority but finding mostly volume. "This process has not followed proper board procedure. I intend to challenge the validity of this trust resolution through every available legal channel, and I suggest this board defer any action until proper verification has been conducted." Diane Foss opened her bag and set a copy of the trust documentation on the table in front of her. With a quiet sound that somehow carried across the entire room, the resolution was executed before Senator Vance, a notary, and 2 independent witnesses, and has already been filed with the state, she said pleasantly. "You are welcome to every available legal channel. We look forward to discussing the financial records in that setting as well." Raymond looked at the documents. He looked at Diane. He looked at Olivia. Olivia looked back at him with an expression that was not triumphant, not unkind, simply clear. The expression of someone who had nothing left to prove and knew it. 2 members of building security, briefed that morning by Thomas Greer, appeared at the conference room door. Raymond Holloway straightened his tie. He picked up his phone and his notebook, the small one he wrote things in, and he walked toward the door with the rigid posture of a man who had decided that dignity was still available to him if he moved quickly enough. He was wrong about that, but no one stopped him from trying. The door closed behind him. The room exhaled. Olivia sat back down in the founding chair and looked around the table at the faces watching her. Some cautious, some relieved, some genuinely moved. And she thought of her grandfather and the particular warmth of his presence and how a person could build something so large and still have it be, at its heart, about something as quiet and essential as treating people well. "I want to talk about the cafeteria pricing policy," she said. And several people looked surprised, and then she explained it. And then several people looked ashamed. And that was exactly where she wanted to begin. The meeting ran for 3.5 hours. By the end of it, a committee had been formed to review staff compensation across every non-executive level. The cafeteria policy was suspended pending revision. 3 board members who had been aware of Raymond's activities and had chosen silence over action submitted their resignations, which Olivia accepted without drama. Clara Reeves was formally recognized in the meeting record as a whistleblower and was offered a position that reflected what she had actually been doing for 3 years, which was running Raymond Holloway's entire operation while he took the credit for it. Thomas Greer, when told that afternoon, shook his head slowly and said that in 22 years, he had never once been surprised by how the building worked, but that today he was surprised in a direction he had not known was available. Olivia laughed at that, really laughed, and pressed his hand, and thanked him for keeping a letter for 8 years, without once asking what was in it. That evening, she sat in her grandfather's office, which was now hers, and watched the city lights come on below her one by one in the early dark. She had her feet up on a footstool that had been in the office since before she was born, and a cup of tea on the desk beside her in her hand, resting on her stomach where her daughter was moving with the steady and unhurried energy of someone who was simply getting ready. "We did it, Grandpa," she said quietly to the room, which held his memory the way old rooms hold the memory of people who loved them. Not dramatically, but in the particular quality of the air and the way the light fell, in the sense that the walls had been listening all along. She stayed there until the city was fully dark and the lights of Cincinnati were spread below her like something her grandfather might have called a beginning, because that was what he had always called the things other people called endings, and she had decided, a long time ago, to see the world the way he did. The chair fit her perfectly, it always had.